Hello, and with this ominous sound, I welcome you to the third and last part of our synth showdown between Serum and Vital, and this will be about modulations. So, what to say about modulations? Well, they're probably the most interesting thing in both those synths somehow, but even more so in Vital, I believe. How do they work? Well, the thing is, like, as you know from the first video, the way you map them is nearly the same. You just get one and drop it on any parameter you wish to modulate. And let's say I'm gonna do the same thing here with an envelope one modulating the wavetable position here. And once you do that, a modulation entry appears in your mod matrix. And so here you can edit things from this or for some keyboard shortcuts, and you can switch it from unipolar to bipolar, and you can change the curve of the modulation. And in Serum you can also add an auxiliary source. An auxiliary source, if you don't know what it's for, like for example, you might want to do some gentle vibrato, which amplitude you control with the mod wheel or the aftertouch. And so to do that, you would put an LFO as a modulation source for your pitch, and then put the mod wheel or the aftertouch as a secondary modulation. And you can also control the curvature of this second modulation. Vital apparently doesn't offer you that, but the reason it doesn't is because you don't need it. You don't need it because every entry in the mod matrix can be itself a modulation destination. So if this was that thing I'm talking about, I'm going to drag the mod wheel on this, and it would make me see there's this new entry on the mod matrix says mod wheel is controlling modulation one amount, and I can do it with every modulation inside my mod matrix up to 64. And I can also modulate the power of the modulation, which is this curve here, which is also quite interesting and quite useful. Now, this is where things end up to be being in the mod matrix. There's a bit more I'll talk about later. Another thing is here on the front panel of Vital, you have all the modulation sources available for direct drag and drop, which doesn't happen in Serum. For example, you don't have anything saying here's the aftertouch, right? But if we right click mod source, you get the entire array of modulation sources, including aftertouch and poly aftertouch, which are considered two different modulation sources. And the noise oscillator, which is quite interesting because it allows you to use the noise, which is actually a sampler, as I mentioned in the first video, as an audio rate modulation source. You won't be missing audio rate modulation sources in Vital, but you cannot use a sample for that. There's a plethora of note-on random and note-on options. There's a release velocity, as you also have in Vital, and a bunch of others, the macros, and these 3 MPE sources, while Vital offers you here this slide, which is inherently an MPE source. And I'm told, I'm not too sure about it, that if I go MPE enabled, this pressure becomes poly pressure, which then makes me wonder what happens to mono pressure. I mean, do I still have a way to have something, not that I would want to, and not that I can, because I'm in Ableton Live, which would filter out every poly aftertouch messages anyway, but I would like to have to have the options to do both if I wanted to, like something that gets modulated on every note if I turn on the aftertouch, and something which is, note dependent, monophonic, polyphonic, not monophonic, sorry. Then there's this octave note, which is quite a weird one because it sends out 12 discrete modulation values, 1 per note in every octave. So like it's 0 in C and the maximum for B on the same octave, and it will repeat itself consistently from octave to octave, which I think is quite interesting and allows you to make some interesting polytimbrality in your sound while keeping it, consistent from octave to octave, which might definitely be interesting. There is this lift, which is basically a note off velocity, and then there is stereo. Stereo, what do you mean? Stereo is a modulation source. Yes, this is really amazing, because what it means is that every parameter in the synth, I mean everyone.
What do you mean everyone?
Everyone can be modulated stereophonically. This is huge. like say, for example, if I get stereo and I use it to modulate the fine tuning of this oscillator, and let me make it bipolar, I can get it to create this sort of a binaural drone with one single oscillator. I think this is huge. I mean, let me make it huge. You see, this thing allows me to detune the oscillator against itself. I wouldn't know how to say it. I mean, it's the thing is, I don't even need to go into a unison. I have two copies of the oscillator. The same oscillator can be sending one signal to one ear and another signal to the other ear, which is great. The thing goes with, as Gary mentioned earlier, every single parameter in the whole synth can be made stereo. And more than that, I can make modulations stereo. I don't even need, I could have done it even if that, having this, I could have just say, okay, let me get something else modulating the amount of stereo modulation applied to something. But I don't even have to do that because, say, for example, I get an LFO to modulate this here, which is nothing at the moment. Let me say enharmonic stretch, not that it will do much. But here I can make this stereo, and this will end up making, see, you can see a lot of visual feedback, seeing how this is actually modulating my effect in both directions. My right channel is being modulated positively and my left channel is being modulated negatively. I'm not quite sure if this is the case or the opposite, but you get the picture. And this is huge. I really think this is huge. There's an even bigger thing, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. Actually, no, let's just talk about it. Mod remapping. This is really one of the big ones. It has a lot of implications with other things I'm going to discuss even later. Thing is, every instance in the mod matrix, again, everyone can be remapped. What does this mean? A lot. To say just one, for example, if I want to make a complex sequence out of a patch, let's say I want something to be periodic like one bar. Like say if I wanted to make a kick and a bass and some other things, I might need in a normal synth to use one LFO for everything I want to modulate because that's the way it goes. Now here, for example, I'm not forced to that. Let's say I had made this thing called kick. Like you see, it's in quarters. Now, if I just go and use this LFO to modulate, let me remove this modulation and say I want this LFO to modulate my pitch, I get, yep, it just does what you expect. You see, it grows linearly. But now, because I morphed the wrong modulation. See, now it's in 1/2, so it's a little bit too fast. If I go back to 1 bar, it's a little bit too much, and there is this thing that is not smooth. So every single kick hit is different from the others. And of course, I could do the same thing with the volume so that I don't get that boom, that big deep drone following everything. And I could use the very same LFO, for example, to do something else, like say modulate another thing. Like for example, if I turn this thing back to being a saw wave or something like that, and I put here, instead of the enharmonic stretch, a low pass, and I made it low pass, significantly low pass. I could also, for example, go and use this same LFO to control this thing and say here, it's this one, I want it to be something else, like for example, this bass drum. It's not really great. See, but you can have these things happen in your synth, and I'm only using one LFO. I mean, for being someone who's just only using an LFO, this thing is already quite complex, isn't it? And you can get it a lot deeper. I mean, I spent some time making this thing, for example, and it's like, I won't say it's a great patch because it isn't. but basically I'm using only this one, but doing what happens in the bar, and this just is adding some nuances for on a 4-bar basis. It's quite it's quite complex already, and I'm suppose there you can easily, or well, not so easily, with just a bit of time and dedication, do much more interesting and complex stuff. So I'm done with saying, I mean, I'm not done because this thing will come up again. I'm going to talk about this further along during this video, and I'm quite sure I'm going to make a dedicated video on the applications of mod remappings because they're huge. They're really huge. Now let's get to something more basic again, which is the envelopes. The envelopes. See here, you seem to have 3 envelopes here and 3 envelopes here. You would be right with Serum because they're actually 3. You would be wrong here because they're actually 6. And how you find out the others? Well, you can find them in the mod matrix menu, or you can just drop something to be modulated by envelope 3 and envelope 4 appears. You can get something modulated by envelope 4, envelope 5 appears, then you get envelope 6, and then even if you map something to envelope 6, nothing happens because they are 6. They're not more than 6. The same thing happens with the chaos generators and the LFOs. The chaos generators are actually 4 and LFOs are actually 8. About LFOs, that thing happens in Serum too. Even Serum, also Serum has 8 LFOs, but we'll get back to LFOs and chaos generators and random generators in a bit. Now envelopes, they're pretty standard, though comprehensive. They're very similar. You can edit their this graphic interface or move the knobs, and the two things are interchangeable somehow. Both have this hold stage between the attack and the decay. The only really relevant difference here is that Vital offers you this delay, so you can actually delay the start of an envelope, the beginning of the attack stage, which you can't in Serum. But it's really not huge because you would do that thing turning an LFO in envelope mode. Now, the envelope's out of the way because there's really not much more to say. I can go to talk about random generators. Here in the global menu, you get this chaos generators. No idea why they call them chaos. You have this. You have the chance to synchronize them to your BPMs to make them monophonic, so that you don't have independent chaos on every voice you play, and a chance to turn it into a sample and hold, which should make it steppier. Here in Vital, on the other hand, you get a bunch of different options. There's this purlin and sine interpolate, which are kind of smooth. Sample and hold, which as you would expect is a little bit more. I don't really know too much about the difference between purlin and sine interpolate, but there's still not a manual, as I mentioned, for Vital, so I cannot really refer to any documentations, just to my sensations on using them and playing with them. Sample and hold, which as you would expect is a steppier, and there's this Lorentz attractor, which will make the joy of all the people who study a bit of maths and physics, knowing that they can use a Lorentz attractor as a modulation source in their synth. You can synchronize it to the BPM, you can make it stereo. That's no surprise. Everything is stereo in the synth, right? Yeah, but this thing is different because it means once you make it stereo that it will morph independently. It will give you two, it will just turn into 2 different chaos generators, one editing the parameters on the left and one editing the parameters on the right, which is pretty nice. You could also make this modulation stereo, which doesn't make much sense, because it would make it just like, monophonically inverted, because you would have, the right side affecting the right side positively and the left side negatively, and the left side affecting the left side positively and the right side negatively. So you just had 2 random generators added in stereophonically out of phase. Doesn't make too much sense in my opinion. Anyway, this is, well, it's not all about chaos generators, because you can change their frequency. You can have them be set into seconds tempo, tempo dotted, tempo triplets, or even key tracked, which is crazy. And there's an option you can have on the LFOs too, which is much more interesting. But even this here, you can have them become chaotic audio rate modulation sources. This is huge and really opens up for a can of worms of generative patches and amazing, unusual possibilities. I haven't seen anything like this yet. So, and another thing you can do if you go from back to being them in tempo is that you can have them go up to 64, 1/64th, but on the other hand, you can have them freeze. What is the point of freezing a random generator? I really don't know, but I do see the point of freezing an LFO. First of all, because you can, have it frozen and then unfreeze it with some control, and so have some motion happen, rather than increasing it in its amplitude, increasing it, having it start from being stationary and then having it move, while at the same time you can you can modulate here the phase of the LFO. Say, for example, let me modulate something with this LFO. Here it's frozen, but I can control the phase of this LFO. So, for example, if I set it like this has basically become a macro knob. I have 8 LFOs, so I can definitely spare one if I am out of macros, which if I'm trying to make something really complex will eventually happen. I mean, I have to say, 4 are not even remotely enough. I complained already on X1st forum that they're not enough, that 4 are not enough for Serum. They're definitely not enough for Vital. So getting back to the LFOs, and there's a little much more to say. There's this smooth parameter, which allows you to smooth, unsurprisingly, the quick abrupt changes in the LFO behavior, but can also be transformed into this fade in, which will add like a slow attack fade in to the amplitude of the LFO, which added with this delay control gives you a lot of possibilities if you don't want your modulation to start right away when you press a note. And then there is this stereo again. What does this stereo do? It introduces a sort of a phase offset between what the LFO does on the left channel and what it does on the right channel. As you might see here, it's frozen, so it won't move. But you see here, I can modulate what the LFO is doing on the right, on the left. And this too can be a modulation destination, which can open up to other possibilities in making interesting stereophonically moving textures, and which could be tempo synced but seem like they're not tempo synced, which would be very cool. And then there is this thing of being key trackable. Now this is really, really huge. I mean, why do I insist so much on this thing? Well, because think about it. The thing is, in itself, it would be huge because saying I can just use any of these LFOs as audio rate modulation sources, even if I just wanted to modulate the phases and pitches of my oscillators, that would allow me to make, even with more traditional mod matrix, that would allow me to have like 8 more FM or RM modulators, operators somehow in my operators. I also have a delay and a fade in if I insist in using them and not controlling the thing with an envelope, and that would be already huge. But with the added option of having this thing here of having the mod remapping possibilities, the thing becomes really, really immense. Like, say, for example, I'm saying this LFO1, I wanted to control not oscillator 1 spectral morph amount, but say I wanted to control the phase. Oscillator 1 phase, to do some typical phase modulation. What do I have now? I have an oscillator which is 1 octave below my fundamental, phase modulating my fundamental, which is a sine wave. Now I have the same thing, but this is a sawtooth wave modulating a sine wave. Not that great. I can do amazing things, like, for example, get this thing here and turn into a sine wave, for example. Now I have the thing that here I put some fade in, which changes everything. Let me get it back to smooth, and I don't want it to be. Now, a kind of a classic up to now, and then I can stay more classic and just do this thing and have an envelope modulating the amount of modulation here, and this, let's say, I really want this to happen. And I can, of course, change the frequency of my of my LFO, changing the ratio. But even more interestingly than this, I can change the ratio in other ways. Say, for example, this one is a sine, but let's say I keep this one to 0, so it's just, and it's in its, or I could go even lower, like let's say I go to -12, so I get more, room to maneuver. And let's say I don't want this to be 1 sine, I want it to be 4 sines. Now, I have that. You see, this one is starts 1 octave below, but it's 4 times the pitch, so it will be 1 octave above. And this is quite amazing, at least in my book. And this doesn't nearly end the possibilities, because I could do more. Like, let's say I get the same LFO again, LFO1. Let me get it. Where is it? LFO1. Sorry, I was losing it. Like LFO1, and I want this to modulate again the phase of oscillator 1, and I want it to be something else, like say 8 sines. So I have something doing the same thing but being in a different ratio, and I'm put another envelope to modulate it even quicker. Let me get envelope 2 to be a bit longer and a little bit less, and this thing a lot more, while this thing goes back to 0, and this one too. I'm doing something which apparently is a 3-operator FM synthesis with 1 oscillator. Isn't it this great? And I mean, I could also make all these things, which whatever, I could make this stereo, like for example, and have the, no, not this one, this. And having the things being modulated out of phase from one ear to the other. It's an amazing thing, and just with a bit of filtering you can get pretty usable and interesting tones. With this mod remapping thing and the fact that you could have recursive modulations within your mod matrix, there's like an endless vault of possibilities with intermodulation source. You could make the craziest textures you could think of, and this, doing kind of traditional FM ring modulation or amplitude modulation is just the beginning. Because again, I won't say it again because I am not wanting to summon Gary Oldman anymore, but here you can go and modulate parameters on the filter, you can go and modulate parameters on this sampler, you can go and modulate parameters within LFOs with the, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. You can modulate wavetable positions. You can modulate the effects on both the spectral and the phase effects. It's incredible. I mean, I'm not saying you could not do this in any other synth. I mean, you could, with a lot of time to dedicate to program something that does it in, I don't know, Reactor, Max for Live, or maybe just Bitwig Modular. But this, it's here. I mean, it's as easy to program as Serum, which is nearly a dump-proof synth. And here you can do this crazy modulations and come up with really, really unusual timbres I couldn't easily get out of anything else. I mean, this is the first time I get a synth which makes me think that, this can do a lot more than Zebra. Cannot do everything that Zebra does, but it does have a whole space of synthesis where Zebra cannot go and this can. Which is huge. It's really, really a lot. And the thing is, it's so deep that I'm just barely scratching the surface for now. I mean, I've seen people doing very simple things on Serum, and that's what it kind of calls you to do with it. But here, I mean, using it as a simple synth, as a subtractive synth, is really kind of misusing it. It's like you're really getting a Ferrari and using it for grocery shopping. It makes, well, you can do that, of course, but I wouldn't recommend it, right? So with all this said, and I think we can go and jump to discuss some conclusions. But before discussing the conclusions, let me indulge in that little bit of mandatory self-promotion. Please, if you liked what you heard so far, and if you've been here so far, I suppose you do, unless you're kind of masochistic, please subscribe to the channel, put a like, leave me a comment if you feel like. You know, the gods of the algorithms from YouTube are very keen in liking it. I mean, they really like people commenting and responding, and yeah, that's definitely a good thing to do for a YouTuber whose content you like. Also, if you were wondering what those logos, Deeptanz production were, well, we provide a bunch of audio services and one-on-one mentoring on music production, sound design, and things like that. And well, if you want to know more, just click on the link in the description and you'll find everything. Also, you might find in links in the description of this video a bunch of other links to my music and to know what I do when I'm not talking to a camera. So now it's time to discuss the conclusions. Vital or Serum? Will Vital make Serum obsolete? Short answer, yes. Longer and more articulate answer, it depends. What type of a producer sound designer are you? Are you the type of man who gets a wife and has some other man bang her? Yeah, because if you think about it, Serum up to now has a huge amount of presets. It's been done, even though the factory presets are really crappy. I mean, they're embarrassingly crappy for a commercial synth of that price. I mean, I'm so surprised. You open Serum, you go to a preset, and they didn't even bother mapping the aftertouch and the mod wheel. I think it's almost unforgivable. Anyway, on the other hand, Vital is growing very fast, and it seems like the people designing the patches, even in the factory, the free version, they really took their time. They really went, I wouldn't say the extra mile, because it's not an extra mile mapping the mod wheel. It's, you know, just the basics, having the basics covered. They at least did that. And not only that, there's a bunch of very interesting and creatively designed patches which I really liked, and I studied into to try to understand what to do with the synth. And yes, I mean, Serum will stay a classic. It's been used for a while, and now it has a huge user base. There's lots of people who learn to program it, and you know, it's, if you have it, if you already paid for it, there's no need to stop using it. Well, why would you? But Vital is definitely going to be another big player in this game. It's wonderful, it's immediate, it's intuitive, and it's surprisingly quick and intuitive to make very complex things on it. That's what I really like with it. I mean, Serum is great for bread and butter sounds. I rarely found a plugin on which you can program something quick and effective and knowing exactly what you're doing. You can be just as fast and doing the same things on Vital, but on the other hand, you have a door open for countless other possibilities, generative sequences, and other things which are maybe not that immediate from the interface, but they're definitely there. And there's that incredible amount of audio rate modulations and lots of other things. I mean, lots of things which really are not very common in most synthesizer plugins, and in Vital are just there, immediately accessible with a practical interface. No crazy coding required, no connecting virtual cables from one place to another. It's all right there. There's a wonderful mode matrix. It's really practical, and you can do things which are really outworldly, and that's definitely something. Well, I think I said everything. So I thank you for your attention, for being with me this far, really, because if you stayed with me this far, you'll probably really like to hear me talking. And then I'll say see you in my next video. I'll definitely be doing more videos about Vital and sound design in general. Bye.